Hi, Anya.
Hi, how are you?
Good. There you are. Welcome.
Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to read a little intro about you and then we'll dive right in.
Cool.
Okay. So, Anya Liftig is a performance artist and writer. Her works have been exhibited at the Tate Modern, MoMA, Queen's Museum, and many other venues around the world. As a dancer and actress, her work has been published and written about in the New York Times Magazine, Bomb, the Wall Street Journal, Vogue Italia, Theater Magazine, and others. Her experimental film and video work has been screened in festivals globally, and her first book that we'll be discussing today, a memoir entitled Holler Out, was released by Abrams in 2023. So Anya, I think I'll admit I haven't finished your book, but when I read the scene it's close to the beginning where you describe a performance piece you did where you were naked in a room and it was designed for the audience to approach you, pour glue on you, watch as the glue harden for hours, and then pick it off you. I was like, oh, we're not in the hands of a memoirist who has struggled to be seen, right? So a lot of the people who I work with it's very fraught, this business of revealing themselves and about what other people are going to think of them or what some of the people they've written about are going to think. And I'm wondering if you are totally free from that anxiety because you have been a performance artist for decades, or if you had to become free in a different way when working on memoir, or I'm hoping you can address that in your personal example, but also kind of talk about how the writers in this class might free themselves up to be
Yeah.
really seen.
That's a very acute observation. And I definitely think that there is, though one can be naked and letting people touch them, and in some cases there are another scene where people are scribbling on me or doing things. Certainly some of the performance acts seem and are very uh vulnerable. I think that that can definitely be another way of hiding, and
What do you
can be
mean?
by I think that what's funny, I was just talking to my therapist about this. Um, but for me, one of the things I talk about in the book is the physical trauma I had as a child, where I lost the use of my leg for a time, and sort of for the circumstances that surrounded that. And I, at a very young age, learned to disassociate from my body and really to deal with trauma through a like mass physical disassociation. And my my relationship with dance, and certainly the way that I really drank the Kool-Aid on studying to a very high level dance technique, first Balanchine and then Graham, was also a form of disassociation, because it was a way of kind of sublimating and just a huge form of denial that there was anything at all wrong, or like acceptance of any type of in my family too, that there was anything possibly wrong that had happened, right? It was like, oh, this was all for the best. Look, she became this, fancy dancer. So I think that for me, for my looking at my body, I always found performance art a place of power, because yes, I could be naked, and that was something that a lot of people certainly have a fear of. But for me, it's like, I wouldn't say that I don't fear, um, people thinking I'm fat or I'm this or I'm that. I definitely do have some of those fears, but for me, it's a place that I go to, which is almost like steel box in my head. And it's a place where I go to where it's almost like it's almost like the nudity and the being poked and prodded, in particular, the way that I was when I was a kid, when as a child in the medical field, um, is almost like my kind of, yeah, shield or armor, because that's the place I went to when I was little and trying to protect myself. But I think that, for me, writing the struggle of being revealed, and the struggle of trying to find my own agency was really was really for me, the process of writing the memoir, because I had never really used my words before, although I had, I've been afraid of words, and I'd sort of let that kind of brash, I'm standing in front of you naked, or I'm letting you do something weird to me, or, the kind of shock value in many cases of what was happening, sort of stand in for any type of real vulnerability. And, and let that be kind of, and I'd been afraid of words. I still am kind of afraid of words. I think that's what's interesting about memoirs, being a little bit afraid of them. And I definitely think that I really wrestled from day one with, what are people going to think? What are specific people in my life going to think? I definitely was worried about what my mother was going to think. I have still not confronted what my Kentucky family thinks. We still, just on Saturday, I had it's like my mom's talking to my family or to my uncles there, and it's like nobody will ask directly, have you read the book? No, we're just kind of like, nobody will say, do you know that this book came out? It's sort of like on Facebook, like, do we know, have they seen the posts for it or stuff like that? I was definitely worried about my ex-husband reading it. I had legal concerns right from the beginning that went right up through right before publishing. I definitely have had responses where, when I put in things like it took me until the very, very end of the writing process to put in things like, I went to Yale Psychiatric Hospital. It took me until probably the third year of writing it to talk at all about any mental health issues. And so a lot of what you see, I think one of the hardest things about reading a book is, especially a memoir, is that you see this kind of like all spelled out on the page, and it seems like it all happened at once. And it did not happen that way at all. The book really, for a while, I would say, was a very disassociated memoir. I would say, even by the time I was searching for agents, when I finally got one, her first comment was, there's not much reflection in this. There's not much of you kind of thinking about what this all means, or why you did any of these things, or what the connections are between these things. Those are all things that came out in the revision process and after working with agents and editors, honestly. So I don't want you to have the impression that it just all kind of, joyously bubbled out. It was a very, very lengthy and process that was one of basically kind of a letting go, and also a sort of like, well, you know what? I've spent 3 years writing this, so fuck it. Fine. Like, why not? Who cares? They already know about this. I already made a terrible joke about my grandfather being cut in two, so right off the bat. So I might as well tell everybody I went to the psychiatric hospital, whatever. Like, like, so but and I can't say that now that the book's been out, I definitely have had people say, wow, like, we didn't know that you were crazy, or we always thought you had some mental health issues, or, that was completely obvious to us, and other assorted strange things. So it's a long answer, but I hope that helps.
No, it's a great answer, and I relate with my book. I wrote a draft. I mean, I was writing about mental health explicitly, so it wasn't that I waited for that piece to go in, but I did hold back on writing about the relationship in the book because I was still ashamed at how it ended and ashamed that it was still going on and all this other stuff. And it was only when I, um, put that all in that the book worked for a reader.
Mm.
Um, and I sometimes feel like writers bring themselves to some kind of point of um, like there's some weird thing in the writing process when you're really engaged on a deep level where it brings you right to something that you actually don't want to write down.
Yes, yes. And I think that what I didn't know when I started writing was that I could express ambivalence about writing things on the page, that I didn't have to be all in to express it. I also didn't know that there were, throughout the book, there are indications that there are mental health issues without saying explicitly that they're there. And there is a lot that is between the lines or implied. And it took me a while to have the confidence in the writing to be able to kind of seed those things in there, and a while to trust that the reader would find them. And that was another thing that, when I think especially when that comment, I know when the revision note came back about reflection, I did a full revision. I took 6 months and did a full revision, sent it back, and the comment was again, better, but still not as much reflection as you need. And I had to actually ask, can you send me examples of what reflection looks like?
Good question.
I said, I really don't know that. I really have no, I guess I just don't know what that is. Maybe I don't know that in my personal life. The other thing that I think was in the editing process that really came through was until the very end, the idea of a spine of the book until the very last bitter moment before it went to, really almost before it went to galleys, the very last revision, it was always, what's the spine of this book? What does this, what is this character? What does this narrator want? And I couldn't tell, I was just like, I was like, I don't know. I just want to live. Like, it's just a story about living. It's just a story about survival. Okay. And the number of times that then I had to realize, okay, there needs to be a spine. What is a spine? And I would say, please tell me what a spine is. And I went to several different authors that I knew and asked each of them, what is a spine? Can you point to a book that has a clear spine in it? Because I really couldn't figure it out on my own. So I just say that to say that there was a lot of this process that was done through mimicry, I think, in terms of, or my best job to say, okay, well, to teach myself, I see this person doing this. How can I do that? And from looking to different authors and from asking people and just asking the dumb questions. I mean, there probably isn't a bigger question you can ask in memoir than what do you want, right? And what is the point? It would be like, why, the question of a spine is, why does anybody want to read this book to find out if you get what you want, right? And just didn't have an answer. So
Who has a question for Anya? Okay, Emily and then Monique and then Mimi.
Hi, Anya.
hi.
One of the most memorable characterizations I've read in literature is Mama. And I, I just wondered if you could talk about her and about her combination of, steeliness, and yet there's the thing where she won't sign the will and it causes a huge complication, and how you relate to her and how she helped shape you. I just am totally curious about everything about her characterization and about how it relates to you as a person and a writer.
Well, that was one of the things that when you talk about, how are people going to react? I was very concerned about how my mom would react about depicting Mama because, and that was something that also took me a while to evolve describing her not in a sugar-coated way. You know, not just as the, well, you know, this woman who had a really tough life who's doing the best she can, and, you know, is kind of like this, you know, this kind of hero who, you know, who lives up a holler by herself and, you know, shoots a gun to defend herself, you know, that there were, to get to the point where she was really to try to portray some of her complexity, and to try to portray the complexity with which she certainly treated my mom and I and my sister, right? And I mean, she's a she's probably, I mean, she's a huge influence in my life. I think that, you know, definitely a lot of my sense of bravery, and a lot of the sense of sort of um just toughness, the kind of like just suck it up, like just like, you know, comes from her. But also a great deal of sensitivity comes from her, and oversensitivity, I would say. And that really, that sense of duality and the sense of unpredictability of, you know, with her, you never knew what you were going to get. You never knew which one you were going to activate. There was very rarely a place that was in between. And I think that I definitely, you know, had, she flashed hot, she flashed cold. And she was wonderful. She also had a really kind of crazy sense of humor sometimes, and a real sense of girlishness at strange moments. And so, you know, I think that ultimately she was proud of us, but she was also angry. And I tried to kind of convey the reasons why she had a lot of that anger.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that gives you any insight, but I definitely have, as I've gotten older, I think that I have, as a young person, I didn't really relate to her. Like I didn't really, I wanted her to love me, and I had no idea how to make her love me. Like I just felt like everything I did was wrong just because I was just born in the wrong place. I was too much like my dad. I was I wasn't there. I wasn't a Kentuckian, you know. I didn't have the things I needed to really speak her language, literally. Um and as I've gotten older, I've come to see her strength more and more in my life.
Thank you.
Monique?
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's amazing. Well, my question was really just, you were talking about the spine and you said you didn't get it till the very end, but I'm curious to know what you would characterize as the spine.
Yeah. So
That's all.
so when I said, you know, I always thought that, you know, one of the things about memoir that's so both cool and frustrating is that, you know, what's the end of the story? We know you lived, right? Like we know you lived because you're writing the story. And, you know, so for me, I think that the spine is, how do you survive being yourself? Like, and how was it that I survived being from two radically different places with very contrasting class and culture values, educational values? And so it took me a while to figure out that it was really about the split, and how does one try to reconcile the split? And it took me a while to figure out that I could echo the split in the imagery of my grandfather, in the imagery of my leg being severed, my sutured, I could echo the split, not just in what I was saying about feeling divided, but also in the imagery and in the scenarios that I was talking about. And that I could use all those good figurative language that we learned in middle and high school to kind of bring to kind of tighten the narrative once I knew what the once I knew what the spine really was. So it was really about how do you survive an upbringing that's incredibly confusing and pulls you in all sorts of different directions. I don't know. What would you say? I don't know if that's what I don't know what other people would say, but that's what I would say. I mean, that's the spine of my life, and that's what I try to do every day. So
Mimi, did you have a question?
I did, and a lot of them have already been answered. Thank you for being here. I listened
oh, really?
over the course of the last 2 days. I couldn't stop. And when I started listening, I didn't know if the narrator doing the audible was actually you. And when I realized, because then I was like, I don't know, this narrator can do the voices and do the accents and switch very quickly from one to the other. So I looked it up. And I thought that was like a profound thing. I don't I read sometimes a book and sometimes I listen. I couldn't stop listening. And we're from different backgrounds, like in terms of how we look and all that stuff. But there were so many bits of it that resonated. And it's interesting to hear you tell the process of first you told all the events, and then the editor said, reflect, 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 reflect. And I thought part of what brought me in so much was those reflections, the end of every chapter, at the end of every bit, the thought that was going through your head and how that related to you as a person. It was phenomenal. And I could talk about it forever. My question for you is, some of the chapters were 2 minutes. Some of the chapters were 18 minutes. And they, you went from like really deeply going into what you were thinking on stage or what you were thinking on the thing, the drinking, the whole salmon one. Oh my gosh. And then you also, the piece that you inserted really in the heart of part 3. And maybe I won't reveal it because everyone hasn't gotten that far, but that event that really kind of triggered the big sort of getting into the psychiatric hospital. It was shocking, but also resonated very deeply. And I'm wondering how much craft and structure, how did that process? I listened to the acknowledgements. Yeah, it took me 6 years to get this book out, but how much of it was piecing together these moments, the 2-minute little things that were just this, and then these bigger, like heavy, substantive things? How did that whole thing come together to then be this book that had so many events, elements, growth, emotional moments, journeys, for the narrator? How did that work for you?
Well, I think that in the end, I mean, so one thing you should know is that it was a big note is I would say it was a much more collaborative process than I could have imagined. So as I say in those acknowledgements, I really thought that it was like a really pretty solitary process that you created the book. And at least the beginning of it was up until I really, sought an agent. And then I was surprised at how many people really were reading the book, or how many people I wanted and was asking their opinion of about issues like reflection, or about, saying, well, do you think I'm doing it here? And how would I do it more? Like, how many voices as a newbie to this I actually kind of needed to hear. And I certainly took a lot of classes too. I took workshops, I read craft books. I just tried to be a real student. I don't have an MFA in writing. So I was really trying to just kind of train to learn everything I could on my own. I think that one thing that you should know about the book is that, until when it was bought, it was only the book did not have anything about art in it. The book only had at all. It was just a book about growing up between Kentucky and Connecticut and the class and culture divisions. There was no layer of art or how that kind of factored in or how that worked at all. And it was the editor who, after I won't go into the details, but at some point said, you need to cut this book by 30% and replace that with talking about your art and a much looser structure as to how you kind of approach the material, and however you want to do it is fine. I need it in 2 months. And I was like, I've been writing this for a million years. And I was very opposed to putting in material about my artwork because I really wanted to stand alone as a writer. I really wanted this to be something where people would be like, kind of like do you know Michelle Zauner, like crying in H Mart? I wanted to be like, oh, and she's Japanese breakfast? Like, oh my God, she's Japanese, like that was my like very egotistical dream, but I wanted to prove myself in a genre that wasn't related to performance. And so when I was given this crazy revision note that I was like, how am I supposed to do this? I, partly because of the crunch of time and partly because I was like, well, if I'm going to, you know, bring my artistic voice to it, then I'm going to just try to do this intuitively and see where I feel like there's a rhythmic punch that could happen. See if I can take material that might be, I was going to have to condense a lot of the material that was longer into to get some of the same kind of plot points in, and cut it down and really strip it down and then put in new material. And so I was like, what I'm going to try to do is to approach it as if it is like I'm improvising and I'm layering this kind of structured line over the top, like almost like a rhythmic beat over the top of it. And I'm just going to, when I feel like I can connect what is in the text to an artistic or to a plot point that's going to have to get cut or a section that's going to have to get cut, I'm going to just do it like how it feels inside my head. And that at that point, that was where the kind of the sections became pauses instead of necessarily defined chapters. So you'll notice there's like sometimes there's like a 2 paragraphs and then there's like, 10 pages, like you were saying. That was where so what I was really trying to do was just feel emotionally what felt right. There was no honestly, I mean, I could tell you that there was, but there was no grand plan. It was me, I had planned a backpacking trip to South America to celebrate finishing the revision when I found out about 2.5 weeks beforehand that I needed to make this major revision. So I spent 5 weeks in South America in Starbucks and Juan Valdez cafes, working on the revision. So I was pretty juiced up on coffee and kind of just like, trying to in Peru and whatever and all these places, feeling my way through it because I was like, okay, if I'm going to have to do this, I'm going to do it my way. And that was very instinctively. So that's kind of how that structure came about, which was a lack of structure, just feeling where my first teacher always talks about like hot spots, like feeling where the like real emotional peaks were, and then kind of like, dropping down from them really fast or like building up to them, slowly, and then like kind of thwacking back, like just kind of playing with emotions really. And sometimes just entertaining myself in those cafes over that period of time. So
Great.
Amazing. Well, Anya, we're out of time, so
okay.
thank you. That went so
Yeah.
quickly, and I feel like we
Okay.
could ask
Well,
you questions for hours.
Uh,
Um,
if any of you have any questions, you can, Lizzie knows how to get in touch. So if there are any questions you have, feel free to like connect to me through her. Like I said, I wrote most of the book in classes as essays and pieces for classes. And it took me a while to do it. And it took me a while to sell the book. And it took me even longer to publish it. So just keep going. There's no magic formula, and just keep going. That's the only thing the only piece of advice I have, because there are many points where the book looked doomed. So I absolutely totally doomed. So so please feel free to get in touch if you have questions or you just need a pep talk. So
that's lovely, Anya. Thank you. So generous.
you're welcome. Bye.
Bye-bye. Fascinating. Really interesting. All right, we are out of time. I will see you next week, and surprise, surprise, the assignment this